Welcome to the Black Ship Universe channel. Now playing The Black Ship Side Story, Barony of the Screaming Forest, Day 7, Part 3, by David Orf.
As Clara and her group were approaching Newtown Harbor, Wyatt and the men of the composters were approaching Newtown's brewery. There was an open door, so Wyatt walked in and called out, "Hello." In the distance, a voice came back, Coming, give me a minute, please. I'll be right with you soon." The composters stood in the entrance, looking around at many barrels, both metal and wood, with pipes running everywhere, and listened to footsteps running down the metal stairs. Eventually, after about 3 minutes, a man with mousy brown hair ran into the room and, leaning against a pillar, quietly said, "Give me a moment. I was on the 4th floor." The 4 pilots exchanged amused glances and waited for the older man to get his breath back. At last, he stood back up and looked at the 4 men in front of him. He recognized Wyatt immediately, and then realized that the other 3 were dressed in the uniforms of Principality fighter pilots. He stood straight. He said, "Sorry for the delay, my lords. I was just preparing to load a brew tub. How can I help?" Wyatt winced at the "my lord" comment, but let it pass. After all, there were now 4 nobles in the room, and he could not fault the man for trying to be polite. So, instead, he said, "My fellow pilots and I have never actually seen the inside of a brewery, though we have all enjoyed a glass or two. When I mentioned that we had a brewery here in Newtown, they all expressed a desire to visit and see how one worked. I was wondering if you could show us around." The man replied, "Of course, sir, my name is Jeff. If you like, I can show you the process. I was just about to start creating a small test batch of beer. You could, if you like, see not just the brewery, but the start of the process of brewing as well." Wyatt looked at his fellow pilots, who were all nodding enthusiastically, so he simply said, "Thank you, Jeff. That sounds like an excellent idea. Please lead the way." Jeff took them slowly up to the 4th floor, explaining that above them was a water tower and the store for malted barley. Then he showed them the start of the process, saying, "Here the barley is fed by gravity into the mill. This cracks the malted grains, exposing the starches which drop into the tank below." They then went down a floor, as Jeff continued. "Here we add warm water, straight from our own well, to the cracked grains in this vessel, which we call a tun, that turns the starch in the grain to sugar. Then the hot liquid drops down another level." Leopold asked, "What do you do with all the waste?" Jeff looked at him and replied, "There is no waste, sir. The mash, that's the solid that remains, can be used for humans. You can just bake it, or it can be used as is for animal feed, or you can turn it into compost while collecting the biogas. We don't have the facilities for that last one here, though." Going down to the 2nd floor, they could see large, copper, vaguely onion-shaped vessels, with a pipe leading into them from the floor above. Jeff carried on with his explanation. "Here, the warm, sugary liquid gets heated in the kettle, and then we add hops for flavor and bitterness. Once it's boiled, the liquid is sterile, and we send it through a cooler to the next process down below." As they walked down to the 1st floor, the composters could see large metal cylinders. Jeff carried on his explanation. "Here we add yeast to the cooled liquid, which turns the sugar to alcohol. Different types of yeast produce different types of beer. In effect, here we decide if you will get a lager or an ale. One yeast floats on top of the liquid and is kept a bit warmer. This gives you more flavor and forms ale. The other type sits at the bottom of the tank and gives you lager. By adjusting the mix of the barley, hops, yeast, and occasionally other items, you control the type of beer, its taste and alcohol content. From here, the beer passes through a strainer and then goes to barrels or bottles. If we want it to age, we can store it in metal or wooden barrels. The wooden ones add to its richness. All of that happens on the ground floor where you came in. Now then, good sirs, we have samples of the beers in a nice cool cellar downstairs. Can I offer you a tasting? The brewery also produces other alcoholic drinks, and we have some you could try." Later, as Wyatt and the composters walked away from the brewery, he reflected on what he had learned. According to Jeff, his barony could produce a variety of alcoholic beverages, not just beer, but cider and other fruit-flavored alcohols and even spirits, remembering his promise to himself never to get as drunk as he was. When Javier Wunder walked in on his party, Wyatt had merely sipped at each sample. Still, when he had commented on how smooth the apple brandy had been, Jeff had insisted on bringing him a different bottle from the brewery cellar, telling him that it contained 12-year-old apple brandy aged in imported casks, though he did not know where the casks had come from. As they had been about to leave the brewery, Jeff had asked him what the new name should be. Newtown. Brewery did not roll off the tongue as they had walked down the road in the general direction of the beach. Wyatt realized that both Leopold and Noltar might possibly have had a little more than a sip of their samples as they talked about prospective names for the brewery. Leopold tapped the House Staples shield on his shoulder and said, "The White Perryton Brewery." Gregor shook his head and Noltar said, "That will be worse than Newtown Brewery. You said there are white deer on this barony of yours, Wyatt." Wyatt nodded. "Oh yes, huge great things with enormous antlers." "So what about the White Stag Brewery?" said Noltar. They considered that in silence for a few minutes as they walked along, but it didn't seem quite right. Finally, Gregor said, "There's an old word for a big male deer. They used to call them harts. You spell it like heart, but without the E pronounced the same, though. So what about the White Hart Brewery?" Wyatt liked it. It rolled off the tongue nicely. Noltar said, "Sounds good to me." Whilst Leopold said, "You need a nice picture of one of those big white deer to go on the bottles. Let everyone know where it was made, quality-like." Wyatt smiled, saying, "Funnily enough, I think I know just the person who could draw one of those." As they continued slowly walking towards the harbor. When Clara and her party arrived at the harbor, she saw Declan Oakmoon waiting for her. Clara looked at the young man, then said, "Sir Declan, I did not expect to see you here." Sir Declan bowed and then replied, "Your Royal Highness expressed a desire to spend some time on the beach. I hope that on behalf of my lord I have provided the best experience Newtown can currently offer. My staff and I have provided the best shade and windbreaks we could find, as well as some basic beach furniture at a suitable distance from the harbor to provide peace. I have arranged for local auxilia to ensure you are not overlooked or interrupted. The facilities at the humble restaurant behind me have been freshly cleaned, and the best-performing auxilia private is stationed inside for additional security. Finally, I believe we should be able to provide your Royal Highness and your guests with an evening meal should you wish to stay for the sunset." Clara smiled. Then she asked, "The sunsets, Sir Declan, do you believe they are worth seeing?" "Your Baron has not mentioned them." Sir Declan's face flushed in embarrassment as he replied, "Ma'am, my lord has been far more occupied than I. In addition, he has had to return to the Noir Navio on multiple occasions. I do not believe that he has had the opportunity to even notice the sunsets." "Well," said Clara, "we cannot miss out on such an opportunity." "By all means, Sir Declan, make the arrangements so that we can enjoy the setting of the sun. But first, let us see what you have prepared so far." When Clara entered the restaurant, Private Lily Bauer was standing rigidly to attention. The staff had all taken a knee and were waiting in line, as were the cleaners. Sir Declan realized that the dusty odor he had noticed when first entering earlier in the day had gone, replaced by a light, fragrant scent of spring. Bare metal on door handles gleamed, and the glass was almost crystal clear. A display of fresh flowers had been placed on the counter, and there was no dirt to be seen anywhere. Clara motioned to the staff to rise, saying, "I am very sorry to have inconvenienced you. I am certain that you have far more important things to do today than prepare for my impromptu visit." At that, all the staff were quick to say that it was not an inconvenience, and that there was nothing more important for them. As Clara took in the room, she noticed the flowers on the counter. "Who did this display?" she asked. A young woman, amongst the cleaners, slowly raised a hand and said, "I did, Your Royal Highness. Did I do anything wrong?" Clara looked closely at the flowers and said, "No, my dear, you did everything perfectly." "Who taught you?" The young woman replied softly, "My mother, Your Royal Highness. She always said that real flowers cheer people up." "Tell me, my dear," said Clara, "what is your name? And why are you working as a cleaner when you have such a wonderful talent?" "My name is Anna, Your Royal Highness, but I have no talent. The school teachers told me I was no good and that I'd have to be a cleaner as I had no skills." Sometimes I can really understand Wyatt's contempt for nobility, Clara thought, but she hid her annoyance, instead asking, "And who is the proprietor of this restaurant?" James came forward. That would be me, Your Royal Highness, James Sicklehorn. Clara looked at the man, liking what she saw. He was dressed as a chef, or cook should be, with clean white apron and hat, a cloth tucked neatly at his waist for him to wipe his hands. Addressing him, she said, "Tell me, Mr. Sicklehorn, what do you think of Anna's flowers? Do you think they make your restaurant more inviting, or are they just decoration that does nothing? Are they in fact no good?" Summoning up every ounce of courage he possessed, James blurted out, "With the greatest respect, Your Royal Highness, and not meaning any offense, but I think her school was dead wrong, and it's not just these flowers, Your Royal Highness. She placed displays above the hand basins in both sets of toilets as well. It makes the place look nice." "Did she indeed?" said Clara. "Well, James Sicklehorn, do not worry, you have caused us no offense, I agree. I believe that her school failed to recognize her true talent. However, I also believe that if he were here, your new Baron would insist on putting this matter right. We do have 2 members of the town council here, though, one of whom is an expert on the plants and animals of Hago. Tell me, Lady Rachel, Miss Elizabeth, do you think that Anna here should continue to serve as a cleaner? Or should she perhaps instead serve better creating flower displays for restaurants and public buildings and perhaps even homes?" Rachel and Elizabeth looked at each other, not being sure who should speak first. Finally, Lady Rachel said, "I believe that this young woman has a talent that is probably more valuable than the important task of being a cleaner. There are a number of restaurants in Newtown. I am sure many would appreciate a talented flower arranger. I know I will be taking advantage of Anna's skills in floristry." Elizabeth added, "Once the old estate's farm is secure, there are many greenhouses. It would be beneficial if we had flowers in those to encourage pollinating insects. Those flowers could easily find their way to a talented florist." Clara then looked at Lady Rachel, saying, "Anna here brought up an important point. Whilst skilled in floristry, her skills in finance are likely to be non-existent. There are, however, several bookkeepers amongst her fellow former prisoners. Perhaps you should task 1 or 2 of them to help what I am sure will turn out to be many people, with skills that might be useful, if only they knew how to run a business." Rachel replied with a curt nod and an, "Of course, Your Royal Highness." With her kindly deed performed, Clara turned back to James and said, "Master Sicklehorn, it has been suggested that I should stay for the sunset, and that the best place to admire it would be from the terrace of your restaurant. It has been further suggested that you might be able to provide dinner for my guests and I. Do you still feel up to the task?" James swallowed nervously, then said, "Your Royal Highness, Sir Declan informed me earlier that if I were to agree, he would ask the other restaurants to contribute as well. I cannot promise a royal feast, but I believe we can produce a tasty meal that you will all enjoy." "A sensible answer, Master Sicklehorn. There will, I believe, be 14 to 16 for dinner. And now, if I may use your facilities, we wish to change for the beach." As the cleaners moved to work on the terrace, James and his staff returned to the kitchens, not entirely sure of what had just occurred. Meanwhile, Lily maintained her guard at the entrance area. Cynthia, Rachel, Raquel, Elizabeth, and Clara proceeded to change into bikinis and beach wraps, each finding a hat and sunglasses within the boxes Clara had bought with her. As she left the restaurant, she turned to Declan and said, "Sir Declan, when you have finished making arrangements for the evening meal, perhaps you could locate your lord and ask him and his companions to join us on the beach. You are also invited. You will find suitable beachwear in one of the unopened boxes." Declan was stunned for a moment. Finally, he stammered out, Yes, Your Royal Highness, of course, at once." As Clara and her companions walked towards the equipment that Declan and his servants had placed on the beach, he could not help but notice that whilst Lady Cynthia was no longer wearing her armor, she still carried her massive sword. When they arrived at the beach equipment, they were pleasantly surprised. The sunshades and windbreaks had been positioned so as to hide everyone within their area, unless you approached directly from the sea. Cynthia commented, "It would appear that Sir Declan is both thoughtful and competent." Shrugging off the beach wraps, they sat on the inflatable furniture and gradually found themselves gently bouncing up and down. First Elizabeth and then all of the ladies began to laugh. Finally, Elizabeth stopped laughing and said, "I am sorry, Your Royal Highness. I did not mean to cause offense." Clara just shook her head and smiled. Finally, Clara looked at the other young women. She said, "Just for today, and just whilst we have sand beneath our feet, let us pretend that I am not a princess and that we have no titles. The whole Your Royal Highness thing is a pain that just gives people a bit more time to think, and being addressed as ma'am makes me feel old. Let us be Clara, Cynthia, Elizabeth, Rachel, and Raquel. 5 young women having an afternoon at the beach." At Clara's declaration, Cynthia drew in a deep breath and said, "My princess has clearly been overwhelmed by the fresh air," giving Clara a look that spoke volumes. Clara, however, simply smiled, then said, "Every one of us knows that the only reason I am a princess is through an accident of birth." Still smiling, a kind, gentle smile, she continued, "While I have every intention of enjoying myself on this beautiful beach, first I would like to ask each of you your opinion on my knight banneret Wyatt Staples. Each of you work for him. Each of you has a different background. I am curious as to your opinions." Clara looked over to see Elizabeth holding up a hand, as if she were in a classroom, and her smile became a grin. "What's the matter, Elizabeth?" she asked. "You're—" started Elizabeth, but then saw Clara silently staring at her. Catching herself in time, she corrected herself. "Clara, would it be all right if I sketched? I find it distracts me when I get nervous." All of the ladies laughed at this, but not unkindly. Then Rachel said, "I try to work out maths problems in my head. It's hard to be nervous when trying to solve complex polynomial equations." Raquel said, I don't really get nervous as such, but I do get stressed. I find practicing throwing my knives helps with that, but this," she said, gesturing to the beach and everyone around her, "is a new experience." Clara, laughing, looked at her and then said, "It is. For all of us, but given you don't get nervous, perhaps you would start. You don't need to go into any depth, I just like your impressions." Raquel pursed her lips as she thought about what to say. Finally, she stated, "He is not what I expected. Certainly unlike any commanding officer I ever served under before. For starters, he hasn't tried to persuade me to sleep with him, that was new." Clara looked shocked, asking, "Is that a common thing?" "I'm afraid so," answered Rachel, then continued, "Since I qualified as a fighter pilot, every leader has tried to get me to sleep with them, except Wyatt, but I was lucky. My noble rank meant they simply put in a report saying I was disruptive or didn't fit in. If I were of lesser rank or a commoner, it would have likely been impossible to avoid. Then there's the training and how he behaves in combat. He gets us to fight as a team, no honor kills. It's all about getting the mission done and bringing us all back alive. I've not met anyone who does that. It's all been about setting up easy kills for my previous commanders so they can get all the rewards. With Wyatt, well, he doesn't care about personal glory. Absolutely not what I expected." She laughed as she finished asking, "Was that the sort of thing you wanted? Your high— Clara?" Clara nodded, then added, "Yes, thank you, Raquel, that's just the sort of thing. Oh, and at some point I'd like to hear more about your former commander's unwanted advances, but we can leave such unpleasantness to another day. Now, Elizabeth, what about yourself? What is your opinion of Wyatt?" "He's nice. Not at all what I was expecting," said Elizabeth, putting down her sketchbook. She said, "When I arrived at Newtown, he was sitting in ordinary clothes, ordinary commoner's clothes, in the doorway of his shuttle, carving a wooden flower. His first words were, 'You're late.'" Elizabeth let out a throaty laugh at the memory. "I had no idea he was the new Baron. He just walked over, picked up one of my bags, and said his name was Wyatt. I was halfway down the street before I realized he was Baron Staples, after my father's warnings about being careful and not to upset him, that he had a short fuse. I certainly wasn't expecting him to be waiting to help carry my bags. Nobody in the town can work him out. He's not what they expected a baron to be. His orders are never phrased as orders. Instead, they are more like requests. Oh, and when he thinks someone has done a good job, he comes to personally thank them. Also, no one can quite work out why he asks them to call him Wyatt or Sir, not Baron Staples or my lord." Elizabeth laughed. "Actually, everyone thinks it's very funny, because Sir Declan keeps saying my lord to him, and Wyatt is clearly annoyed by that, but seems resigned to it." Clara raised an eyebrow at that, saying, "Oh, so Sir Declan insists on being formal, does he? I think we can break him of that habit, at least a little." Cynthia looked at her friend, exclaiming, "Clara, no!" but Clara just smiled her playful, mischievous smile. Elizabeth continued. In fact, I was beginning to think my father had exaggerated Wyatt's abilities until he shot the Drazen right in front of me. That got everyone's attention, with both Clara and Cynthia exclaiming, "He what?" Elizabeth nodded, carrying on. We had just walked out of the former Lord's orangery while looking round his farm and estate. Elizabeth pointed in the general direction of the estate. It's over in that direction, just about 5 kilometers away. That was 4 days ago. I was laughing at Wyatt because he had drawn his pistols as a goat came running out through the trees straight towards us. I wasn't laughing when I saw the Drazen chasing it, but Wyatt shot the Drazen 6 times, killing it instantly. He had the sergeant major take some men and go get it the next day to ensure that the auxilia knew how to kill the horrid creatures. He said most people shoot them in the wrong place, just making them angrier. The sergeant said that will not happen here, not now. So I guess that was a good thing. I think Wyatt is a good man. Clara looked over at Rachel and said, Rachel, why don't you call up Wyatt's little trip to the Gallant Venture on your datapad to show Elizabeth, so we can see what she thinks after she has seen it. Then tell me what you think of Wyatt. Rachel called up the video and set it to play for Elizabeth, then sat back down before starting. I've known Wyatt for even less time than Elizabeth, and had even less contact with him, but from what I have seen, he is a contradiction, capable of both great anger and great kindness. From what I've been able to experience, he works on a very simple principle, although I might be wrong. With him, you get back from him exactly what you give. That is to say, if you are mean to him, you can expect him to be mean in return. But if you are kind and generous, then he will be kind and generous to you. Clara interrupted, her tone soft, approachable, and inquisitive. Can you give any examples? Rachel continued. Oh, most certainly. The first day working for him, I was having huge difficulties with a really unpleasant man. I would have found a different person to deal with if I could. But everyone said he was the person to speak to about datapads. He was just questioning my authority and who I was working for the 3rd time. When Wyatt walked into the office, he must have heard what was being said because he came and stood behind me and asked if there was a problem that had the horrible man squirming. Wyatt then went and said that Your Highness had recommended me. I thought he was going to drop dead from fear. As it was, he had to go off and calm down. Strangely, when he returned, he was offering a far better deal. All of the ladies laughed at that. Rachel carried on. But there have been other companies. For example, Wyatt asked me to get a selection of toys for the children, so I went to a distributor to see if I could get a deal. It turns out that all of the toy companies push the latest toys onto the markets. But this means the distributors have a lot of shelf space full of slightly older but still in their unopened boxes items. With the tax breaks for charitable donations, I've now got 270 tons of toys coming to Hago. Wyatt's instructions are quite clear. Take a small percentage for the children in Newtown. It will probably be no more than a few tons, and give the rest to General Swallowtail for distribution to the children of Hago. Elizabeth interrupted. He's doing what? Why would he do that? Rachel held up her hands. I have no idea. I think he has younger brothers. Maybe that has something to do with it. Or maybe he just wants to help the children. Clara and Cynthia shared a look that the other ladies failed to notice. Clara was pretty sure she knew why Wyatt was prioritizing the children, but she said nothing. That story would be for Wyatt to reveal, if and when he was ready. Finally, Rachel added, There's something else, and actually, I'm glad I met you, Elizabeth, as this involves you. Wyatt wants his counselors to have better clothes. He said we are to all have 2 good suits for formal occasions and for dealing with official visitors. But the rest of the time, we should dress just a little smarter or better than the commoners. He wants us to be approachable, but also for people to know that we are the ones they should be approaching if there are problems. Elizabeth laughed at that, saying, I've never had a suit. Most of my clothing has been practical. A lot of military kit that Mother just adjusted to fit me. I'm not even sure what I should wear. Clara looked at Elizabeth and Rachel, then said, Oh, I think we can find you a few suitable items. We can have a look at my personal files later if you like. There are lots and lots of designs, but first, I think we should see what's in the other boxes I brought with me. Cynthia opened an insulated box and withdrew a bottle of lightly sparkling wine, 5 glasses, and a box of almost frozen red berries, plus a spoon, as Clara said, I have regular and alcohol-free versions of the wine. Take a spoonful of berries and add them to the glass, then pour the wine over the top. It makes a wonderful combination. While Clara and the ladies were enjoying sparkling wine on the beach, Wyatt and the composters were making their way towards the harbor, with Wyatt pointing out some of the restaurants and other structures of potential interest. Arriving at one street corner, they came across an unusual sight. Declan and 4 of his servants were trying to manhandle an enormous table onto a much smaller electric vehicle. The composters watched for a few seconds as Declan and his men struggled to place the massive table across the rear of the small vehicle, before Wyatt said, "Come on, let's lend a hand, or we may be here all week watching this." With the composters helping, Declan managed to balance the table across the rear of the small vehicle, and whilst the others held it steady, 2 of his men used ratchet straps to secure it in place. Wyatt turned to Declan, asking, "What are you up to, Declan?" Declan turned to Wyatt, replying, "My lord, Her Royal Highness, Princess Clara has requested that a large number of people, including yourself and the composters, join her for dinner on the restaurant terrace overlooking the beach. This table should be just about sufficient to seat everybody that Her Royal Highness has invited." Wyatt had a nagging suspicion that Clara was about to play one of her jokes again, but she was his friend, and if you could not have a joke with friends, then there would be even less fun in life. "I see," he said, "but the restaurant at the harbor is limited in its ability to produce fine food fit for a princess, so since you seem to have taken it upon yourself to organize everything, how do you propose to solve that problem?" Declan looked only slightly concerned as he said, "My lord, I intend to visit every restaurant and ask them to contribute at least 1 dish, sufficient to feed at least 16 people. I also need to find table linen, crockery, and glasses along with matching cutlery. I will try to find a selection of dishes that will complement each other, allowing people to select from a buffet rather than a grand dinner." Wyatt listened to Declan and asked him, "Do you know what it is that my princess requires of us?" Declan looked uncomfortable as he replied, "Not entirely, my lord. However, I believe you need to go to the harbor restaurant and wait there." Replying to Declan, Wyatt said, "When we removed the final kitchen equipment yesterday, it came with a lot of brand new crockery and cutlery. Why don't you find wherever they put that and use it?" Then Wyatt looked at his fellow composters, saying, "Well, why don't we go see what Her Royal Highness needs us to do? At least it's a nice day. We can help get the table off the little truck when we get there." So, leaving Declan and 2 of his men where they'd met him, they slowly followed the little truck with the very large table down to the harbor restaurant. On arrival, the composters helped Declan's men move the table onto the terrace at the rear of the restaurant and set it up so that it didn't rock. Then Declan's servants went off to collect the many chairs they would need. As they sat on the low wall that separated the beach from the terrace, Marie Athelgrim came out through the doors of the restaurant, carrying a tray loaded down with homemade ice cream cones. She called to the 4 young men, "Excuse me, sirs, but I was wondering if you would give me your opinion on the ice cream. This is the first batch made with the local milk. I've got 3 flavors, a light vanilla one, an apple one, and a homemade cookies and cream version. The cones are also freshly made." 5 minutes later, all 4 young men were sitting eating ice cream while watching the waves break on the beach. Wyatt started the conversation. "These are good, aren't they? Made with milk from deer, no less." Gregor, with a very pleased look on his face, agreed, "It's a very rich taste, isn't it? Not like the ordinary ice cream on board the ship. The bits of cookie are great, too." Nultar added, "I love the bits of actual soft apple in mine. I wonder how they managed to get that to work." Leopold was far too busy to comment as he devoured his own ice cream. But when he had finished, he said, "It was very nice, but I still don't see why we're here. It's not as if I'm ever going to meet a beautiful woman on this deserted beach, am I?" As the composters laughed at Leo's comments, a bright, clear voice from behind asked, "And what are we, Sir Leopold, has-beens and old leftovers?" 3 of the composters spun round to face the speaker, their eyes going wide in shock at what they saw, but Leopold stood rooted to the spot, as he tried desperately to think of something to say that wouldn't get him executed on the spot. Finally, he said, "I meant no insult, Your Royal Highness. I had no idea that you were so close." Then, realizing he could be digging himself deeper into trouble, he quickly added, "Not that I would ever consider, I don't mean any insult. From behind him, he heard Raquel's voice say, "Why, Clara, I do believe Leo is actually lost for words. What a surprise!" Everyone present started laughing at that, and Leopold felt himself turning red with embarrassment. Cynthia Winfield called out, "You can turn around, Sir Leopold. Your head will remain attached to your shoulders for now." Turning slowly, he saw the 5 very different but equally stunning young women in front of him. Each wore a simple off-white wrap dress, each dress slit open to the waist, slightly exposing one thigh. A wide-brimmed hat in a similar color to the dress and sunglasses, and simple sandals on their feet, and each held a simple flute glass in their right hand. However, Cynthia also carried her huge sword in her left hand, resting it across her shoulders. Leopold's mouth just dropped open until Noltar reached over and pushed it closed. None of the composters said anything at the sight. Too stunned to react, Wyatt held on to the edge of the table, afraid he would pass out. Finally, Clara looked at Cynthia, and Cynthia said, "Our princess has declared that just for today and just while we are on the sand at this beach, those of us present here—" She paused, looking at Clara for a moment, before continuing. "Plus Declan Oakmoon and our guests at dinner will only use each other's first names. There will be no titles, mentions of rank, or other courtly courtesies. By royal command, this is her day off, and you will all enjoy it." Even Cynthia at this point could not help herself and started to laugh. Wyatt looked at his men, seeing the shock on their faces, looked at his princess and asked, "Really, Clara? But we are not exactly dressed for it." Clara replied, "My dear Wyatt, did you think I would bring suitable beach outfits for myself and the ladies and ignore you gentlemen? There is a box in the entrance area with suitable costumes for yourselves. You can use the restaurant's toilet area as a changing room while we ask if there are any more of those ice creams we saw you eating. I suggest that since he doesn't seem to be here, you leave a message for Declan to suit up and join us when he returns." As Wyatt went into the restaurant area, he found Private Bauer standing at attention. He nodded to her, then went to the door into the kitchen. "Do you have more ice cream?" he asked. Marie came to the door. "Yes, sir, we have lots more, and I can easily make still more if we run out." "Great," said Wyatt. "Perhaps you could take some out to the 5 ladies on the rear terrace, and then maybe you could get Lily here a snack," he said, gesturing to Private Bauer. Lily looked surprised that Wyatt had remembered her name, saying, "Sir, that's not necessary, I'm fine." Wyatt smiled. "Acting Corporal Bauer, I have only recently become an officer, but I have learned that a good officer always ensures that those under their command are properly taken care of. Making sure you and your team are properly fed while on this task is ultimately my responsibility. Now, I know your team are spread out far and wide, and asking the cooks here to make something for them is not practical, but for you it is. So here is what you are going to do. When Declan returns, you will inform him that Her Highness expects him to join the rest of us on the beach. That suitable attire has been provided for him, that his staff, once they have bought the seats to go with the table, are to take snacks out to your troops, then come back here for food themselves." Wyatt looked at Marie and asked, "Is that okay?" Marie nodded. "Okay," said Wyatt. "Once they have set out the chairs and eaten, they can rest until it's time to fetch the food from the other restaurants. Then they can get cleaned up and help serve dinner. When we come in off the beach, you can send your people to go get dinner, but I'd like you to remain here until dinner is finished, if that's okay." Lily saluted, saying, "That will not be a problem, sir." Wyatt then looked in the box labeled composters, finding that there were individual bags with all the composters and Declan's names on them. Opening the bag with his name on it, Wyatt found a hat, sunglasses, a brightly colored shirt, swim shorts, and simple sandals. Shrugging, he went to change. Coming out of the men's toilets, dressed in the new beach outfit, he felt somewhat self-conscious. He had placed his pistols inside the bag that the outfit had come in, not wanting to leave them lying around, and so he returned to the restaurant entrance area in his new costume, carrying the bag. Looking across at Lily, he could see the young Auxilia had her lips pressed firmly together, doing her best not to smile. Wyatt looked at Lily and quietly said, "Not a word, if you ever hope to make sergeant." A simple nod of her head showed she had heard and understood, and with that Wyatt went out to join the others. As he walked back out onto the terrace, the composters started to laugh. Wyatt gave them a couple of minutes to calm down before saying, "I do not know why you lot are laughing. You haven't seen your outfits yet. I suggest you go and change." As the ladies enjoyed their ice creams and the remaining composters went to change, Wyatt sat on the low wall and looked out to sea. After a couple of minutes, Wyatt was aware of someone behind him. Looking around, he saw Cynthia standing there, her face embarrassed. "It wasn't my idea," Cynthia said, voice barely a whisper. "My unhinged princess decided we needed a day off." Wyatt, following Cynthia's lead, turned to look back at the sea, murmuring, "Okay, I can understand that, but what's with the whole first names only thing? And why on the beach?" Cynthia sighed quietly before quietly saying, "I think Clara wanted to be able to actually speak to everyone, to see how they were doing. I sort of understand it's much easier to chat if everyone is dressed for the beach and using first names. People are less formal, more honest even, if they are not using titles." She quietly laughed. "I would have never said that until I met you, Wyatt. Clara's insistence that we all just use our first names is highly unusual." Wyatt quietly said, "It's certainly that. I would have never dreamed that I might have a noble friend, let alone a princess of House Astor." Then he too laughed. "I can't wait to see how Declan handles the no-titles thing." "I cannot get him to call me Wyatt. He always uses my lord, so Clara's request is going to make him go crazy." This caused Cynthia to laugh out loud, which in turn prompted the ladies to come over to Wyatt, Clara asking, "What's amused you, Cynthia?" This resulted in Cynthia explaining about Declan Oakmoon. Now Clara started to laugh, just as the composters returned to the terrace, each dressed in Clara's choice of beachwear. At first, they thought Clara was laughing at them, causing all three men to turn red with embarrassment, but soon Wyatt explained the real reason for the laughter, and a plan was hatched. When Declan returned to the restaurant half an hour later, Lily repeated Wyatt's orders to him. Giving instructions to his servants, Declan then changed and walked up the beach to the spot where everyone was sprawled, apparently relaxing and enjoying the sun. He politely coughed and he said, "Your Royal Highness Declan Oakmoon reporting as requested." From out of nowhere, a small bean bag hit him in the chest. Wyatt looked up and said, "Ah, Declan, you got the message, and I see you found the outfit that Clara picked out for you." Declan turned to face the princess, who looked up at him from beneath the brim of her hat as he said, "I thank your highness for the outfit, but I am not sure why I am here." As he did so, another small bean bag hit him, though again he failed to see who threw it. Wyatt continued, "Clara has issued a royal command, just for today, and just while we are on the beach with sand beneath our feet, we are only to use first names and absolutely no titles." Declan turned to face Clara. "Your High?" He began as this time the three more beanbags hit him. Tentatively, he tried again. "Clara." This time, no beanbags flew. What is it that you require of me?" Clara, beaming, now replied, "Why, Declan, we need you to make up the numbers. I thought since you had provided us with some beach games, we might have some actual fun. Then I realized that we had 5 women, but only 4 men, since there is no way I'm just going to watch, and since Wyatt here has said some nice things about you, I thought that you should be invited." Wyatt knew this couldn't be the whole truth. The outfits had been picked out before Clara had boarded the shuttle. There was clearly more to it than that. He might have said something, but as he looked at Clara, she noticed and gave him a single, slow wink. What the heck, he thought. If Clara wanted a little fun, he wasn't going to object. It had been worth it just to throw a couple of beanbags at Declan. And so, by royal command, for the next 3 hours, they engaged in friendly competition on the beach. The beanbags had come from a game that required you to lob the bag's underarm, trying to get them onto a target. After several rounds of that game, a dead heat was called between Wyatt and Cynthia, no one else getting anywhere near as close. For the race down the beach and back, Clara had surprised everyone by beating them all, though Declan came in a close second. When it came to swimming, Cynthia and Wyatt both had to excuse themselves, saying they couldn't swim. As the other 8 young people swam away from the beach, Wyatt turned to Cynthia and asked, "So you can't swim?" Cynthia looked at him for a long moment before admitting, "I can swim, it's just I need a buoyancy aid to keep me near the surface. My body density is so high that without one I sink straight down. How about you?" Wyatt sighed. "I never learned to swim." Normally, I would, I suppose, have gone to learn with a group of school friends, but Cynthia took the hint, simply saying, I understand. They watched as the group began swimming back towards the beach, surprising everyone. It was Rachel who reached the beach first, with Leopold and Elizabeth coming in joint second. Gregor came in at the back, though he didn't seem to mind. When they weren't engaged in friendly competition, they lounged about on the sand, with Elizabeth drawing them in her sketchbook. It was during one such quiet moment at about 4 in the afternoon that Cynthia suddenly shot upright, reaching for her sword, then stopped, saying, "You are not going to believe this." Running down onto the beach, dressed only in a tiny set of Speedos, came Jincho. As they watched, he ran across the beach and straight into the sea, where he proceeded to paddle about and splash for almost 10 minutes, clearly enjoying himself and blissfully unaware of the number of people watching him. Finally, he returned to the beach, where he became aware of the 10 young people watching him. As he came out of the sea, he shook his feathers, clearing them almost completely of water. Wyatt took him a towel, saying, "I didn't know Yukanti could swim." Jincho took the towel from Wyatt and finished drying off, replying, "Some learn to swim, not many. We can only stay in the water a little while, but it's nice. On a warm day like this, it is wonderful." If Jincho was surprised to see so many others at the beach, including the princess and her bodyguard, he did not say it. Instead, he looked at the wide, gently curving beach, then said to Wyatt, "Good place to rest. Jincho has fixed sewage works and generators, has given instructions to repair refrigeration plant, and has given designs for new vehicle to Tevish. So Jincho takes short break now, unless Wormbrain needs more." Wyatt laughed. "Enjoy your break, Jincho. You are joining us all for dinner tonight, so you might as well relax for now." Jincho flopped down on the beach and proceeded to join the rest of the group and soak in the sun. Hello to Barony of Screaming Forests fans. Some of you will be pleased to know that David Orf has finally set himself up a Ko-Fi page, so if you want to, you can now show your appreciation and buy him a coffee. His Ko-Fi link is in the description below. Have a great day, everyone.